It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who you're probably familiar with him. He's on the radio. He does Unite IE with me, and he has his own daily show with the Jen and Don show. He's active with the Unite IE, and he's out front a lot on things. But for as much as you see him out front, it's like an iceberg. That's the 10% that you see. Everything that he does, in fact, everyone that you see who's active, Tim, Joanne, members of the cabinet, when you're politically active, what you see is 10% of the amount of effort that goes into that. It's the 90% that you don't see, which backs up that 10%. Donald Trump, in a recent speech we're going to talk about, he said that we will no longer, I can't read this, looking this way, let's try this page. We will no longer surrender this country, its people, to the false hope of globalism. The nation state remains the true foundation for happiness and harmony. I'm going to talk more about Donald Trump's foreign policy and the reaction to it. And with this, let me introduce my good friend, fellow Patriot, Don Dix.
Evening. So this is going to be one of the best, easiest presentations I've ever done, because I'm going to let Donald Trump do all the talking. But before I do, both Chris and Tim referenced some recent laws. Chris and Rick were up in Sacramento. They got a bill introduced through Assemblywoman Shannon Grove. Tim referenced some laws that recently passed. But I thought I'd pile on to that a little bit, because it's been a particularly active and disgusting week in Sacramento. So today, a bill that requires community colleges to designate someone to assist illegal immigrants, students, with their financial aid paperwork just passed the Assembly. That's Assembly Bill 2009. Now, if that were the worst of it, that would be okay. I could probably, okay, fine. But that's not the worst of it. They're currently debating a bill right now that would require all farm workers to be paid overtime if they work 8 or more hours a day, as opposed to 40 hours a week. So as soon as farm workers hit 8 hours a day, they're going to get overtime. If that were the worst of it, I could probably get, that would be okay. But it gets worse. There's a bill to require the police. Now, I don't know if you follow what's happened in Compton recently, but Compton has hit 3 times the gang-related shooting fatalities so far this year as last year at this time. Chicago, over the weekend, 60 shootings, almost 8 fatalities. So what are we going to do in Sacramento? Let's pass a bill that requires the police to alert adult gang members that there's a suspect in an investigation. Huh? All right, that's pretty bad. But now we read that there's now a bill to prohibit the consideration of a person's assets when they apply for welfare, just passed the Assembly. Right? I'm going to quit my job, man. This just got good. Now, this is the one that really got me, and it should get everybody here, because we talk about the anti-business climate in Sacramento. How about this one? There's a bill that passed that would allow now the labor board. Now, some of these have to go to the Senate. Some of them were already passed in the Senate and have to come, and by passing the Assembly, they now head to the governor's desk. There's a bill that allows the labor board, I'm going to read this to you, permits the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement to commence an investigation. Now think about a government agency that can the Department of Labor, commence an investigation. Let's say for whatever reason they don't like you, they don't like your business, they don't like your political leanings, you made enemies in the community. I feel like I'm George Carlin reading the list of 7 words, you shouldn't say. But they can commence an investigation, issue a citation, or bring an action against an employer without receiving a complaint from an employee. I mean, think about that. The Department of, what could go wrong here? You've got a Department of Labor, an agency that is packed to the gills with people like what Chris and Rick just described, anti-business climate in, California. Think about Jerry Brown and Obama have just declared climate change the greatest security threat facing us. We have oil companies here. How do you think the Department of Labor would like to have this law so that they can start going after the Department of Labor just because they suspect something's wrong, that they've done something wrong? Can you imagine how they can tie up businesses forever fighting this? This is like, you got to prove you're innocent time. They just say you're guilty, now you got to prove you're innocent. This is crazy stuff, and it just kind of goes to show all these groups, these efforts by Chris and Rick, Oath Keepers, what you guys are doing here, getting out the vote, getting people engaged. This is happening because not enough people are getting engaged. This is happening because we're, by and large, we're letting it happen. We need more people involved, and we need more people aware of this kind of crap that's going on in Sacramento, because that law right there could drive businesses at a record pace out of here. Forget all the global climate change stuff. All right. How many of you guys in here speak Trumpese? Seriously, how many of you speak Trump? A few of you. Do you understand sometimes when Donald Trump is talking what he's actually saying? I don't. I'll admit to it right up front. I have sometimes a real difficult time, not just understanding, because I went to a couple of his rallies. I got to sit in the press box, talk to people that were associated with the press that cover the guy week after week after week as he does all these campaigns. And it was fascinating talking to these people, because they finally said, it takes about 3 weeks of listening to him before you really begin to hear him and hear what he's saying. So not too long ago, about a month ago, Donald Trump gave his first his first teleprompter speech, but his first real nuts and bolts policy speech on foreign policy. It was 45 minutes. And I listened to it, and then I came away with, that sounds pretty substantial. And then I really tried to start ferreting through, what did I really hear? Did I, and ultimately, whether it's Donald Trump or, Pete Aguilar, we want to hold all of our elected officials accountable. We want to hold them all accountable to what it is that they say that they're going to do. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to pick apart, because as Greg mentioned, I head up a group, a chapter of Act for America, and we focus on national security, of which right now foreign policy is inextricably linked to national security. So from a national security perspective, I wanted to understand, what is he really saying? What are his priorities? So I listened to the speech again, 45-minute speech, and I was like, I still don't get it. Partially because when Donald Trump talks, you got to eliminate a lot of what I call campaign rhetoric, okay? What I call Donald Trump repeats. You ever notice how they'll say, one thing and then they'll say it again and then they'll have a slightly different way of saying it, and 3 minutes goes by, he said basically the same phrase. So I wanted to eliminate all the repeats. In this foreign policy speech, which was done, he'll say where, I forget who he did it from. You could really kind of tell a lot of the applause lines throughout were prompted. You heard the one clap start, and then everybody else kind of chimed in. So I wanted to get rid of all the extraneous effluvia and listen to specifically what it was that he had to say. And I edited the video out for my use. I showed it to our Act for America meeting, and Greg said, wow, that was awesome. Would you come explain what you did and show it to our group? So that's what you're going to see. You're going to see his foreign policy speech with bundles of edits through it, trying to get it down to what I call the quick. What were the important issues? And then I've got a couple of videos, if we have time, of experts on foreign policy and national security commenting on it. What was their analysis? All right, and then if we still have time after that, then we can get into some discussion, but we might be running short on time, so I don't know if we'll be able to do that. So there's basically 5 sections that his speech is divided into. At first it starts out, which I've edited this out completely, with a look back. He talked about in the 40s how we saved the world and how we saved the world again in the Cold War. And then what you're going to hear is the 4 sections. He's going to go through what he feels are the 5 current weaknesses in our foreign policy. Then he's going to go through what he calls his long-term plan that has 6 elements. Then he's going to summarize in what he calls our foreign policy goals that must be based on America's core national security interests. And this is a little more philosophical. And then he concludes with a couple of the lines that you just saw Greg put up there, with some broad sweeping sort of lines that if Donald Trump becomes the president could quite honestly end up being quotes that we'll be saying from him for a long time to come. So Greg, are you ready? Hopefully. All right.
For our country. One that replaces randomness with purpose, ideology with strategy, and chaos with peace. The direction I will outline today will also return us to a timeless principle. My foreign policy will always put the interests of the American people and American security above all else. America first will be the major and overriding theme of my administration. Today, I want to identify 5 main weaknesses in our foreign policy. First, our resources are totally overextended. President Obama has weakened our military by weakening our economy. He's crippled us with wasteful spending, massive debt, low growth, a huge trade deficit, and open borders. Our manufacturing trade deficit with the world is now approaching $1 trillion a year. We're rebuilding other countries while weakening our own. Ending the theft of American jobs will give us resources we need to rebuild our military, which has to happen, and regain our financial independence and strength. Secondly, our allies are not paying their fair share. Our allies must contribute toward their financial, political, and human costs. Have to do it. But many of them are simply not doing so. They look at the United States as weak and forgiving and feel no obligation to honor their agreements with us. In NATO, for instance, only 4 of 28 other member countries besides America are spending the minimum required 2% of GDP on defense. We have spent trillions of dollars over time on planes, missiles, ships, equipment, building up our military to provide a strong defense for Europe and Asia. The countries we are defending must pay for the cost of this defense. And if not, the U.S. must be prepared to let these countries defend themselves. We have no choice. Thirdly, our friends are beginning to think they can't depend on us. We've had a president who dislikes our friends and bows to our enemies, something that we've never seen before in the history of our country. He negotiated a disastrous deal with Iran, and then we watched them ignore its terms even before the ink was dry. Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, cannot be allowed, remember that, cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. President Obama gutted our missile defense program, then abandoned our missile defense plans with Poland and the Czech Republic. He supported the ouster of a friendly regime in Egypt that had a long-standing peace treaty with Israel, and then helped bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power in its place. Israel, our great friend, and the one true democracy in the Middle East, has been snubbed and criticized by an administration that lacks moral clarity. President Obama has not been a friend to Israel. He's treated Iran with tender love and care and made it a great power. Iran has indeed become a great power in just a very short period of time because of what we've done. Fourth, our rivals no longer respect us. In fact, they're just as confused as our allies. But an even bigger problem is that they don't take us seriously anymore. President Obama watches helplessly as North Korea increases its aggression and expands further and further with its nuclear reach. Our president has allowed China to continue its economic assault on American jobs and wealth, refusing to enforce trade deals and apply leverage on China necessary to reign in North Korea. He has even allowed China to steal government secrets with cyber attacks and engage in industrial espionage against the United States and its companies. Finally, America no longer has a clear understanding of our foreign policy goals. Since the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, we've lacked a coherent foreign policy. One day we're bombing Libya and getting rid of a dictator to foster democracy for civilians. The next day, we're watching the same civilians suffer while that country falls and absolutely falls apart. We've made the Middle East more unstable and chaotic than ever before. We left Christians subject to intense persecution and even genocide. Our actions in Iraq, Libya, and Syria have helped unleash ISIS. And we're at war against radical Islam, but President Obama won't even name the enemy. And unless you name the enemy, you will never, ever solve the problem. Hillary Clinton also refuses to say the words radical Islam, even as she pushes for a massive increase in refugees coming into our country. After Secretary Clinton's failed intervention in Libya, Islamic terrorists in Benghazi took down our consulate and killed our ambassador and 3 brave Americans. Then, instead of taking charge that night, Hillary Clinton decided to go home and sleep. And now, ISIS is making millions and millions of dollars a week selling Libya oil. And you know what? We don't blockade, we don't bomb, we don't do anything about it. We're going to finally have a coherent foreign policy based upon American interests and the shared interests of our allies. We're getting out of the nation-building business and instead focusing on creating stability in the world. Our moments of greatest strength came when politics ended at the water's edge. We need a new, rational American foreign policy, informed by the best minds and supported by both parties. This is how we won the Cold War, and it's how we will win our new future struggles, which may be many, which may be complex, but we will win. First, we need a long-term plan to halt the spread and reach of radical Islam. Containing the spread of radical Islam must be a major foreign policy goal of the United States and indeed the world. Events may require the use of military force, but it's also a philosophical struggle, like our long struggle in the Cold War. In this, we're going to be working very closely with our allies in the Muslim world, all of which are at risk from radical Islamic violence, attacks, and everything else. We should work together with any nation in the region that is threatened by the rise of radical Islam. But this has to be a two-way street. They must also be good to us. The struggle against radical Islam also takes place in our homeland. There are scores of recent migrants inside our borders charged with terrorism. For every case known to the public, there are dozens and dozens more. We must stop importing extremism through senseless immigration policies. We have no idea where these people are coming from. There's no documentation. There's no paperwork. There's nothing. A pause for reassessment will help us to prevent the next San Bernardino, or frankly, much worse. All you have to do is look at the World Trade Center and September 11th. And then there's ISIS. I have a simple message for them. Their days are numbered. I won't tell them where, and I won't tell them how. We must, as a nation, be more unpredictable. We are totally predictable. We have to be unpredictable. ISIS will be gone if I'm elected president, and they'll be gone quickly. Secondly, we have to rebuild our military and our economy. The Russians and Chinese have rapidly expanded their military capability, but look at what's happened to us. Our nuclear weapons arsenal, our ultimate deterrent, has been allowed to atrophy and is desperately in need of modernization and renewal, and it has to happen immediately. Our active duty armed forces have shrunk from 2 million in 1991 to about 1.3 million today. The Navy has shrunk from over 500 ships to 272 ships during this same period of time. The Air Force is about 1/3 smaller than 1991. Pilots flying B-52s in combat missions today. These planes are older than virtually everybody in this room. And what are we doing about this? President Obama has proposed a 2017 defense budget that in real dollars cuts nearly 25% from what we were spending in 2011. Our military is depleted, and we're asking our generals and military leaders to worry about global warming. We will spend what we need to rebuild our military. It is the cheapest single investment we can make. Our military dominance must be unquestioned in this time of mounting debt. No $1 can be wasted. We're also going to have to change our trade, immigration, and economic policies to make our economy strong again and to put Americans first again. This will ensure that our own workers, right here in America, get the jobs and higher pay that will grow our tax revenues, increase our economic might. As a nation, we need to think smart about areas where our technological superiority, and nobody comes close, gives us an edge. This includes 3D printing, artificial intelligence, and cyber warfare. A great country also takes care of its warriors. A Trump administration will give our servicemen and women the best equipment and support in the world when they serve and where they serve, and the best care in the world when they return as veterans and they come back home to civilian life. Our veterans have not been treated fairly or justly. These are our great people, and we must treat them fairly. Finally, we must develop a foreign policy based on American interests. Businesses do not succeed when they lose sight of their core interests, and neither do countries. Look at what happened in the 1990s. Our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania were attacked, and 17 brave sailors were killed on the USS Cole. And what did we do? It seemed we put more effort into adding China into the World Trade Organization than we did in stopping Al-Qaeda. Our foreign policy goals must be based on America's core national security interests. And the following will be my priorities. In the Middle East, our goals must be, and I mean must be, to defeat terrorists and promote regional stability, not radical change. We need to be clear-sighted about the groups that will never be anything other than enemies. We have to be smart enough to recognize who those groups are, who those people are. And we must only be generous to those that prove they are indeed our friends. We desire to live peacefully and in friendship with Russia and China. We have serious differences with these two nations and must regard them with open eyes. But we are not bound to be adversaries. We should seek common ground based on shared interests. Russia, for instance, has also seen the horror of Islamic terrorism. I believe an easing of tensions and improved relations with Russia from a position of strength only is possible. Some say the Russians won't be reasonable. I intend to find out. If we can't make a deal under my administration, a deal that's great, then we will quickly walk from the table. It's as simple as that. We're going to find out. Fixing our relations with China is another important step in really toward creating a even more prosperous period of time. China respects strength. And by letting them take advantage of us economically, we have lost all of their respect. We have a massive trade deficit with China, a deficit that we have to find a way to balance. A strong and smart America is an America that will find a better friend in China, better than we have right now. Look at what China's doing in the South China Sea. They're not supposed to be doing it. We can both benefit or we can both go our separate ways. If need be, that's what's going to have to happen. After I'm elected president, I will also call for a summit with our NATO allies and a separate summit with our Asian allies. In these summits, we will not only discuss a rebalancing of financial commitments, but take a fresh look at how we can adopt new strategies for tackling our common challenges. For instance, we will discuss how we can upgrade NATO's outdated mission and structure grown out of the Cold War to confront our shared challenges, including migration and Islamic terrorism. I will not hesitate to deploy military force when there is no alternative. But if America fights, it must only fight to win. I will never send our fighters into battle unless necessary, and I mean absolutely necessary. And we'll only do so if we have a plan for victory with a capital V. Our goal is peace and prosperity, not war and destruction. The best way to achieve those goals is through a disciplined, deliberate, and consistent foreign policy. I will also be prepared to deploy America's economic resources. Financial leverage and sanctions can be very, very persuasive, but we need to use them selectively and with total determination. Our power will be used if others do not play by the rules. In other words, if they do not treat us fairly. Our friends and enemies must know that if I draw a line in the sand, I will enforce that line in the sand. War and aggression will not be my first instinct. You cannot have a foreign policy without diplomacy. A superpower understands that caution and restraint are really, truly signs of strength. Although not in government service, I was totally against the war in Iraq, very proudly, saying for many years that it would destabilize the Middle East. Sadly, I was correct. And the biggest beneficiary has been Iran, who is systematically taking over Iraq and gaining access to their very, very rich oil reserves. My goal is to establish a foreign policy that will endure for several generations. That's why I also look and have to look for talented experts with approaches and practical ideas, rather than surrounding myself with those who have perfect resumes but very little to brag about, except responsibility for a long history of failed policies and continued losses at war. Finally, I will work with our allies to reinvigorate Western values and institutions. Instead of trying to spread universal values that not everybody shares or wants, we should understand that strengthening and promoting Western civilization and its accomplishments will do more to inspire positive reforms around the world than military interventions. The world must know that we do not go abroad in search of enemies, that we are always happy when old enemies become friends and when old friends become allies. Too much destruction out there. too many destructive weapons. The power of weaponry is the single biggest problem that we have today in the world. To achieve these goals, Americans must have confidence in their country and its leadership again. Many Americans must wonder why our politicians seem more interested in defending the borders of foreign countries than in defending their own. Americans must know that we are putting the American people first again, on trade, on immigration, on foreign policy, the jobs, incomes, and security of the American worker will always be my first priority. No country has ever prospered that failed to put its own interests first. Both our friends and our enemies put their countries above ours. And we, while being fair to them, must start doing the same. We will no longer surrender this country or its people to the false song of globalism. The nation state remains the true foundation for happiness and harmony. I am skeptical of international unions that tie us up and bring America down. And under my administration, we will never enter America into any agreement that reduces our ability to control our own affairs. Under a Trump administration, no American citizen will ever again feel that their needs come second to the citizens of a foreign country. I will view as president the world through the clear lens of American interess. I will be America's greatest defender and most loyal champion. We will not apologize for becoming successful again, but will instead embrace the unique heritage that makes us who we are. The world is most peaceful and most prosperous when America is strongest. America will continue and continue forever to play the role of peacemaker. We will always help save lives and indeed humanity itself. But to play that role, we must make America strong again.
So, just so that you know, that's like 1/3 of the whole speech edited into the salient points. So, and I even see probably another 5 minutes or so that I could edit out just to get it down further. You asked if there would be a copy available. I've got a couple of more tweaks to do, and then I'll get it up on YouTube and get the link over to Greg to distribute to you guys, because I want to break it up into its component parts so that you can see how he's progressing through this. So, following his speech, the TV, the cable news channels were littered with analysis of this. I've got a bunch of it here. We don't have time to go through it all, but John Bolton's one of my favorite, guys in foreign policy and national security. So I thought we would just watch and see exactly what John Bolton thought of his speech, and then we'll probably have to wrap up.
The question is, how will it play among voters? How is it being received in the foreign policy realm? Joining us now with a look at that, Jimmy Turner, former White House National Security Council staffer under both President Bush and President Obama, and also Ambassador John Bolton, a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, both of them Fox News contributors. Mr. Ambassador, let me start with you. I know you are neutral in this race. You have not endorsed Donald Trump or anybody else. Did anything in that speech win you over?
Well, I thought it was a very strong and impressive speech. I thought that by coming back again and again to the point that what should be the lodestar of American foreign policy is protecting American core national interests, he was right on target. I liked his emphasis on the relationship between a strong American economy and our ability to have a strong presence in the world. I thought his analysis of the many failings of Obama, the Obama administration's foreign policy was on target, and I thought that his observations about the need to have a strong military to help create the kind of structures of deterrence that avoid conflict were all very strong too. It's a surprise, frankly, that he didn't give this speech. The campaign didn't have the speech up 6 or 8 months ago. So this is a beginning. It obviously doesn't cover everything, even though it was 45 minutes long or have a lot of specifics. He now joins, I think, Senator Cruz in this debate. Senator Cruz having made a number of thoughtful speeches on national security before, but I think it was an impressive first statement of his thoughts, not all of which I agree with, but now we'll see the debate going forward.
Jillian, I know that all of Washington, the foreign policy establishment, you might say, has been waiting for this speech. What do you think they heard? How is it being received?
Well, a lot of anticipation surrounding it. The question was, is this going to be Mr. Trump's sort of come to Jesus moment with the establishment? And I believe that it was. This is the best tone and tenor we've heard from him on the national defense, probably for the duration of the campaign so far. I agree with the ambassador. I would have liked to have seen it 6 to 8 months ago. Would have made me feel a lot better about his prospects as commander-in-chief. But I think what he did today is he brought this substance to the heart of the Washington establishment, and I think that's going to go a long way towards engendering some goodwill going forward as he's trying to build up his foreign policy team.
He didn't shy away from criticizing the Obama administration. There was one line in particular early in the speech that I heard. I want to play that for you, and then I'll get your reactions.
Our friends are beginning to think they can't depend on us. We've had a president who dislikes our friends and bows to our enemies, something that we've never seen before in the history of our country.
There's been controversy over, images of President Obama, whether he bowed to the King of Saudi Arabia, that kind of thing in the past. But as an overall statement, Mr. Ambassador, how do you take that?
Well, I think he said something that certainly many Republicans have said for 7 years, that our friends can't depend on us anymore and our adversaries don't respect us. I could probably give you the names of 20 House and Senate members who have said the same thing. So I think it's absolutely right. I agree with his assessment that the Obama-Clinton-Kerry foreign policy has been represented a huge setback for the United States all around the world. And it's our declining influence, our declining willingness to protect our own interests that's also undercutting our alliances and the structures of deterrence that we've created, thus fostering more chaos, more threats to the United States. So I thought that part was right down the mainstream of Republican foreign policy thinking.
Ambassador, it's Heather Howard here. I want to ask you, of all the things that you heard Donald Trump say that he wanted to do, some of it seemed to lack some specificity, which has been a pretty common complaint about some of his policies before. But what do you think would be feasible, the first thing that he could potentially get done as President of the United States?
Well, one thing he mentioned, and it was just a mention, but it's certainly dear to my heart, is the restarting of our national missile defense capability. Under the George W. Bush administration, we got out of the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty so that we could begin a national missile defense to protect us against launches by rogue states like Iran and North Korea and Iraq, protect our innocent civilians from nuclear attack. The Obama administration, which has never believed in national missile defense, the president himself, Joe Biden, the vice president, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, have gutted that program, leaving innocent American civilians vulnerable to blackmail by the likes of North Korea and Iran. So I think resuming in a major way national missile defense would be a great way to start.
And Jillian, when you talk with a lot of our allies over in Europe, I think that would be music to their ears to hear that taking place.
Absolutely. I think the idea that he's going to start sort of re-engaging with certain parts of the world where he feels this administration has been sort of lacking is one of the most important things he brought to bear in this speech today, because what he really did was shore up for some people who have doubted his sort of perspective on these issues, calling into question things like nuclear alliances, calling into consideration things like our long-standing traditional alliances in Western Europe, military bases there. This will be very reassuring, I think, to not only voters but to the foreign policy making community here in Washington.
Ambassador, some folks, including Ted Cruz, have doubted his stance on the Iran nuke deal. Do you think that he's sort of calmed some of their concerns with how he addressed that today?
Well, I didn't have a texted speech in front of me. I was just listening, so I may have heard this wrong, but it sounded to me like he did not say he would accept the deal and try and improve it. What I heard him say several times was Iran will not get nuclear weapons. Now, my view has been from the outset that signing this deal was a strategic mistake. I don't think it can be fixed or renegotiated. I think it should be repudiated. That's something Senator Cruz has said is his position. But the key is to say they will never get nuclear weapons, because the deal now puts them on a highway to nuclear weapons. I thought it was a strong statement.
Jillian, there was a statement in there that caught my ear. He said it's time to reinvigorate Western values and spread them around the world. That contrasts with some, I guess, in the Obama administration who maybe practice a sort of an I'm okay, you're okay foreign policy. How is that going to play in the international community, saying that it's time to reinvigorate Western values?
I think that it's something that Americans need to hear. So regardless of what the rest of the world thinks when they hear this, it's something that's going to be very welcome here at home. Not just to voters, but again, to the policy establishment here. One of the biggest criticisms he levied against the Obama administration in this speech, and has done throughout the campaign, is their refusal to what he calls acknowledge the enemy. So to name radical Islamic terrorism as the #1 threat posed to the United States today. He reiterated that today, and I think that goes hand in glove with his sentiment about reasserting Western values, what it means to be American, what it means to be all these things in the international community.
All right, Jillian, thank you, Jillian Turner, and Ambassador John Bolton. Thanks so much for sticking around, listening into that speech, and giving us your expertise as well.
That's John Bolton and Julian, well, sorry about that. Didn't mean to blow you guys out. And Julian Taylor. It is late in the program here, so any conversation that we wanted to have, we're not going to be able to have. But I will make sure that I forward this video, even trimmed down further, to Greg so he can get it up and you guys can look at it again. Because this is one of the purpose of government. What's the primary purpose of our federal government? Keep us safe. That involves foreign policy. That involves national security. Jill Brunotti's wife came up and said, of the bills that I shared tonight, they actually were successful in killing that farm overtime bill in overtime session, I guess. So congratulations to the Republicans up there for holding firm. A little bit of good news to end the evening.
We are running late here, but if anyone has comments, if you'd like to join the discussion of this great presentation, raise your hands and we'll call on you. Not everyone at once. Come up.
I'd rather sit down. I was not able to hear the speech before. I'm impressed.
Okay.
It's the first time that I've heard anyone give a speech about us being Americans and the love of our country and money and jobs, etc., etc.
Very good.
The minute I heard Trump was going to run, I said, all right, yes!
So Donald Trump got a new vote tonight, right? Okay, there you go. I'm sure there are a lot of people that did not have a chance to see it. If you didn't tune into it or you haven't played the video of it, gone out and purposefully sought it out, it came and went in the 24-hour, 24/7 news cycle like that. But I think it is an important piece of Donald Trump's platform and his candidacy to understand what it is that he says about this area. So thanks for the opportunity to share that with you. Have a great night. And remember, every night at 6 o'clock, tune into the Jen and Don Show, and 4 o'clock to Greg and I on Saturday. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.